En esta segunda parte converso con Lama Willa. Además de ser mi amiga, Willa Blythe Baker es lama, autora y maestra budista con décadas de experiencia en el Dharma y guiando su propia comunidad, Natural Dharma Fellowship, la fraternidad del Dharma natural en los Estados Unidos. Ha llevado a cabo el retiro tradicional de 3 años 2 veces y actualmente está dedicada a practicar y transmitir el Dharma de forma apta para nuestros tiempos y psique. Su libro más reciente, Wakeful Body, El cuerpo despierto, explora una visión del budismo integrado en el cuerpo. Tiene un doctorado de la Universidad de Harvard en estudios budistas. Willa ha servido como una importante aliada para personas que han sido víctimas de abuso por parte de maestros budistas, además de haber vivido ella misma esta experiencia.
I want to shift a little bit and think about what's involved emotionally for survivors of abuse in the process of coming to terms with what they're experiencing, in the process of starting to speak out. And you and I have spoken a little bit about survivor psychology. You speak of shame, you speak of fear of losing one's practice, or faith in one's teacher. We've all seen situations where there was very serious reprisal by the part of the community against survivors who speak openly about their experience. Can you talk about what's at stake, psychologically or emotionally for survivors?
Okay. Yeah, I think that first of all, unburdening as a survivor, unburdening from the veil of secrecy, stepping out from the veil of secrecy is a profoundly inspiring act. And it's an inspiring action. And it's an action of unburdening. So for those survivors that haven't yet come forward, I would say that I highly recommend coming forward to someone, to some person that you can trust. Really unburdening the truth to that person will help begin to set you free if you are in that kind of a situation yourself. So I would say that limited disclosure is almost always a liberating experience for a survivor. To be able to tell someone what happened is huge. And as soon as possible after what happened, but telling them later, and whenever you are able to do it, it's very liberating. I think that for me, it was liberating to be able to talk about what had happened to me. It was the beginning of moving through the phases from victim to survivor to thriver, these phases that you move through as something has happened to you. And to make that movement part of the process is opening up about what happened. And but also there's coming forward in a bigger way, and that takes a lot of courage and strength. And so I used to think that just coming forward in a bigger way was a blanket yes for everyone. But now I think it requires a process of reflection, and you want to make sure before you come forward in a bigger way, if you're planning to do that or you want to do that, like coming forward to your community about with what happened, you want to make sure you have a circle of support. So several people around you that you've already told that are committed to standing by you when you disclose in a bigger way. So finding support is the next step to coming forward. First is telling someone, and then second is telling a few people and finding support. And then third is if you want to confront a community, is figuring out who in the community will be a good listening person for you in the beginning, And you may or may not be able to go through the avenue of the community. So there are other ways to go. There are organizations that help survivors come forward, like an olive branch in the Buddhist community, or Faith Trust Institute, which I think actually has just closed its doors, but I think there are other organizations like that that help people come forward to their community. And so that's another possibility, is finding an organization that can begin to give you some support coming forward. It takes a lot of courage. And I would say that to be ready to receive some support and help in that, and also to receive some difficult experiences from that as well, because communities often rally around their teacher to protect the teacher, and in doing that become aggressive to the people that have come forward. And it's very hard for people in a community at times to open their hearts to survivor stories, because they're trying to open their heart to their teacher, and it sets up a conflict. It's the most mature people in a community that are able to hold both compassion for a perpetrator and compassion for the survivors. That's a very mature stance. It's not easy one to hold for many people, to hold the complexity.
I think also a lot of the people who might be listening to this might have their main reference point for experience around abuse not be a Buddhist community, but be a family, where there are also relationships that are, where there is a power difference. And so I just wonder if you could reflect a little bit about, the how shame works in those situations, how fear works, the fear of losing one's place in a structure that is apparently designed to protect and support one. Can you talk a little bit about what has to be undergone and what the inner obstacles are to being able to speak about it?
Well, survivors have a certain psychology in which they empathize with their abuser, and they may vacillate between wanting to confront anger for their abuser, wanting to confront their abuser, and fear of their abuser, and love for their abuser. This is very complicated, right? To feel there's this vacillation that can happen between love and hate for survivors of incest and survivors of sexual abuse within a spiritual context. And so to work out those feelings is important. I would say most survivors of incest or of spiritual abuse should get a therapist pretty soon, once they realize that there's something to be addressed. And the therapist helps us work through those feelings and get to a place of understanding that we are not at fault for what happened to us. We're not at fault for that. And as a survivor of spiritual abuse, you frame what happened to you as your own failure, right? Because as a student, how could you be anything but at fault, right? The teacher must have known what was right for you, and you didn't get it. You didn't understand it. You weren't able to receive the blessing or whatever. And the same with a child in an incest relationship. The parent must know what's best for me, and so I must be at fault. So the first thing that we have to work through as survivors is that we're not at fault. And once we are able to work through that, it's much easier to stand up and speak the truth, because we understand that what happened to us was unfair to us, and was not in our own best interest. And we didn't know. And so So yeah, that would be what I'd say about that.
Mhm.
Getting some help in therapy. And the Dharma can do a lot, and our practice of meditation can do a lot. It can't do everything. We need support. We need support, and our personal stories, being able to tell those personal stories, can really help us. The very minutia of what happened, to disclose it to somebody who isn't in our family and isn't in our community, like a therapist who doesn't know us from any other context, can be very helpful to get a more objective view of what happened and how to move forward. Yeah.
So, what would have been helpful for you, or what do you suggest individuals can do or say or be that would be a supportive condition, that would be helpful for people who have experienced abuse?
Um, to trust your own voice. You trust your inner voice. Ask your body for advice, and our body often is able to respond even better than the mind in these coming to terms with abuse. The body will tell the truth when the mind is spinning a story about how to understand a certain situation, how to make sense of the abuse, how to fit it into your worldview and make it clean. But your body will often be saying, no, something's not right. Something's not right. And to begin to listen to your body is important.
And when other people are expressing what they've undergone, when they're, saying that the teacher that everyone in the community reveres, or the uncle or grandfather or family member who everyone feels is important to have, as a figure of respect in the family, what can we do? How can we support people who are struggling, to find their voice, and to recover their agency?
Be there to listen deeply to their experience, listen deeply to their story. I think deep listening and opening the heart is a first step to changing things. So if you're in a community or you're a friend of someone who's suffering from that recovery from that kind of abuse, to listen deeply and to affirm their agency, either to come forward or their decision not to try to stand by them in their agency, and to be a mirror to reflect back to that person what happened to them from your perspective, because people who've been through abuse don't necessarily understand that it was abuse. And so being able to reflect back that what happened to them was not their fault, and what happened to them was not okay, and that they can make a choice to come forward. They can make that choice. And to remind them that it may, I think in cases where it may keep other people from being abused, it can be a good idea to come forward, depending on the conditions. I mean, there are conditions where you may see there's no potential for that abuse to continue. But yeah, standing by them to make their choice, whatever it is.
And what's harmful? What are the unskillful, unuseful, painful, harmful things that, sometimes people do in response to hearing allegations of abuse?
Mm-hmm. Well, the most harmful thing you can do is to close off your ears, to not listen deeply, to not want to hear about it, not want to know about it. And that is experienced by survivors as erasure, an actual erasing of the truth, an erasing of the past. And that's in fact what you're doing when you don't listen to those allegations and you don't look into them. Actually, it's not enough just to listen. Deep listening is the first step. Second step is you actually have to look into these allegations and see whether they are true. And if they're true, that's actually a really important part in the process, is finding out what actually happened precisely. You need to know the details, and you need to gather as much information if you're to actually do an investigation, which can be important, especially if there's going to be any change or if it's going to come forward to the whole community. The whole community needs to have a very good idea of what happened, because otherwise there will be a lot of doubting going on. So the actual facts matter. The facts matter. And so listening deeply, investigating, actually going the next step and investigating, and not letting it go, because the people in the community may be pushing this truth away and not want to know, and they may already have some inkling that it's true and they've suppressed it, or they have already, there's this status quo situation in communities where they don't want to know, may not want to know. So helping the community to come around means not letting it go, really expressing it. And when there's harm, we need to look into it. So even in our Buddhist context, the Buddhism that we practice is all oriented around ahimsa. Ahimsa means non-harm. Our ethics is an ethics of non-harm. So if it's an ethics of non-harm, we actually have to know when harm has occurred and to take some steps to heal the harm. That is our imperative.
And what do you think would have to change in the way that we're practicing and transmitting Buddhism in order for our communities to be actually safe spaces?
That's not a hard one to answer, actually. I used to think, answer that in a vaguer way, but now I answer it in a more specific way. Our communities need to have a grievance procedure in place. Must have a grievance procedure on the website, publicly expressed and available, a way that people in the community can make a complaint if they need to. So there needs to be a grievance procedure that needs to be present somewhere on the website, or these days it's the website. And secondly, there needs to be an ethics committee. And the ethics committee should consist of some people from within the community and a couple of people outside of the community, because ethics committees could be co-opted by enablers. That's possible. So ideally, the ethics committee has a couple of people outside of the community, a couple of people within the community. Grievance procedure, ethics committee, and then third, a culture of transparency. A culture of transparency. And transparency is something you have to work on as a community on an ongoing way. You just have to keep working at it. You're never going to be perfect at it, but you just have to keep working at making sure that when people want to know something within the community, you have a way to just say, yeah, absolutely. You want to see our tax returns? Here they are. You want to see, like this, open.
So I, listening to you, I agree that we need those things, but one of the communities, that community that I first cut my teeth working around advocating for abuse, was one that had a very good ethics policy and an apparently quite a robust grievance procedure, which didn't work because the entire organization was structured to, give space for the teachers to the lamas to exercise their will over the environment. And that was a situation where there was a board that was divided, but basically mostly loyal to the head lama, who was not the abuser. The abuser was another teacher, but was close to the head lama, and the head lama was very invested in a form of guru devotion where if the teacher did it, it must be good for you. It must be right. The teacher's a bodhisattva. He's a Buddha. He's infallible. It was a blessing for you. And so that really sort of, for me, makes me think like those things, just exactly as you said, are very liable to being, misdirected or to being, co-opted by people who are loyal to the teacher. So how can we ensure that doesn't happen? And the culture of transparency, how do we get there? Because don't talk about the teacher's faults. And, there are a lot of sort of cultural obstacles that we have in Buddhist communities that make it very difficult to get there. How do you see us getting there?
So I think in the West, we really have a chance to get there because there are laws, and nonprofit organizations do ignore those grievance procedures and those ethics committee recommendations at their own risk, and they protect the teacher at their own risk. The board has a fiduciary responsibility to maintain safety within the nonprofit's sphere. And so if that safety is not maintained, that board of directors is liable for lawsuits. And so it's important too that I didn't quite go far enough here on what's needed for an organization. Finally, what else is needed is an actual formal education in the responsibility that a board carries to the nonprofit organization. They need to understand what risks they're taking when they protect an abuser, and that protection can result in that is them taking a risk of being sued for enabling the teacher to perpetuate abuse. And those lawsuits have happened, and they have been won in religious communities, in Eastern religious communities, Buddhist and non-Buddhist, recently, especially after the Me Too movement, and more lawsuits are now being filed based on the success of the previous ones, building on the success of those previous ones.
There's so many forces in play, and I think you're right. The threat of financial consequences, the self-serving interests of the institution, but you sort of would hope that as communities that are apparently committed to ethics and to compassion and to kindness, that there might be another way. That's just where we are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's always the press too. There's always the possibility of coming forward to a news organization, and that has been used by some individuals to get a story out before too. And that's another valid way forward. That's another way forward. I think all of these steps are important to begin to enact this culture of transparency, that you know, if these things are happening out and become more out in the open, then the appropriateness of it will be quickly evaluated, and the people who are involved are much more protected. When things aren't known, people get hurt, not protected. So yeah. And I also wanted to say something about going back a little bit to grooming, because we sort of started with that grooming thing. Yeah, that abuse kind of depends on masking itself as something else, and I didn't fully get what I wanted to say in there. Abuse in Buddhist communities has been masked as consort practice. It's been masked as a ritual. It's been masked as therapy. This is for your good. I'm doing this for you. There's always another motivation on a groomer's part, which has to do with self-gratification. And in that self-gratification, the person who is doing the grooming hides that part of it. And that the erosion of boundaries in the case of abuse is gradual. It starts with a comment, or it starts with a little bit of touching. It's usually gradual. It's not always gradual. Sometimes it's really sudden, but it's often gradual. And yeah, I just mentioned that because if something is coming your way and it's uncomfortable, and you're in that kind of a situation, that's when you start to share it with another person, if possible. And it's usually in those conversations that things get worked out. Yeah.
So finding the courage and speaking if one has survived, making the space for conversations about abuse in our communities, being willing to face our own fears that maybe Buddhism isn't so perfect as we imagined. I think especially many people are looking for a spiritual path, are disillusioned with the path that they were raised in, or that their culture is based on. Buddhism has a very sort of, romanticized or exoticized image. It also has presented itself as very aligned with science, very rational. And so we have a lot of illusions about that we get to a Dharma community or a Buddhist center, and we're kind of in a place where the normal, messiness, the normal self-interest isn't really going to be at play. And so we can end up having a Buddhist practice that's based on a lot of illusions, even though Buddhism is telling us, that it's about seeking the truth with both eyes open and turning towards suffering, not turning away from suffering. And yet we have the habits of turning away from suffering, and we have the habits of living with lots of illusions. And so, for Buddhists, and this happened to us in our community, people didn't really want to talk about it so much. Like, please, let's not keep talking about this. It was destabilizing, it was threatening, it was uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And yet what you're saying, and certainly what I've been saying, is that, this is necessary for our communities to really be safe spaces for us to explore who we are and to awaken it. And so facing abuse in Buddhist communities is good for our communities. It's certainly supportive to survivors and hopefully is preventing future harm. But you also made a comment in your article that losing our illusions about Buddhism and about our teacher, and recognizing that actually we had a false sense of security, can itself be liberating. Could you talk a little bit about how that works, and how facing the fact that our teachers are very imperfect and that abuse goes on in our communities and people cover it up for all sorts of reasons, how can that be, strengthening, and how can that deepen the authenticity of our spiritual path?
Okay. So, yeah, I actually think that disillusionment can be a state of awakening. It's like when everything's been stripped away, it's close to awakening. Let's put it that way. Disillusionment is close to awakening. Maybe what we need to get over is our shock that things weren't the way that we thought. But the shock kind of wakes us up into realizing that the real refuge has never been out there somewhere in the world, that the real refuge, the one you can really lean on, is within. It's what you access and cultivate in your own practice. That you can rely on, that you can lean on. So it isn't that we don't need support. I mean, support, I would say right now in my life, Sangha is way up there. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha is way up there in my refuge experience. This notion of a supportive group of friends, a supportive circle of Dharma friends, is incredibly empowering. But I think what we realize is that the ultimate refuge is exactly as the Buddha said. He said that the Dharma and the Sangha are, the ultimate refuge is Dharma, right? The Sangha and the Buddha can pass away, but the Dharma will live in you, will continue to live in you. And what does it mean by Dharma? One of the meanings of Dharma is truth. And so, what we're exposed to in these topics of teacher abuse, we're actually exposed to the raw truth. That's a kind of a Dharma. We're exposed to what has been hidden. The veil has come off. It's just like enlightenment, right? We're exposed to, it's a metaphor for enlightenment, right? Enlightenment is hidden by our delusion. The delusion gets ripped away and our eyes can see clearly. That happens in these cases when our community that we thought was perfect and the veil is ripped off and we realize it's imperfect, it's messy. That's a kind of awakening to the truth of samsara, that it's messy. And seeing that messiness is a kind of a clear seeing. It's a loktong, it's a vipassana, it's an insight. And it reconfigures this self as more real, vulnerable, raw, and true than we were before, able to lean in to the shadows. Being able to do that is a deep practice. So we are being called to a deep practice when our illusions are ripped away. We're being called to lean into vulnerability. We're being called to open to many perspectives. We want to know, what is the perspective of the perpetrator even? What is the perspective of the victim? What is the perspective of the community? What is the perspective of each individual we're being called to open to that and to not shut down into the bad ones and the good ones. That's a profound practice. If you can step back from the bad ones and the good ones and just be like, where is the hymns? Where is the harm? And how can we help? So, and in finding that truth, that the deep Dharma is inside of you, you're not reliant anymore so much on what you're wearing or what you're chanting or what ritual you're doing. You realize that's all like part of the play or the illusory drama that we're enacting, that the true Dharma is much deeper than that. And you're being asked to go really deep with your practice. And for a while, as you know, I've told you before, I think we talked about this, I had to let go of my formal practice for a few years after leaving the community that I was a part of. Almost let go of my formal practice, except for the simplest of practices, like just sitting and being with the nature of mind, being with the nature of mind, being with the inner Buddha, and learning to listen more deeply to my immediate present moment experience, my senses, my body. That became this place of refuge, and the rituals, everything else had to fall away because it was all sort of imbued with this, some of the problems that we had discussed about, separation and duality, and just wanting to get more close into the intimate and the non-dual.
And then, because the aim of awakening is to be able to start creating an awakened world, create conditions for everyone to awaken. So when we are practicing a Dharma that's free or freer of illusions and fantasies and wishful thinking, we are able to create real conditions that are protecting others from harm and generating authentic conditions for them to feel safe and to do the work that we all need to do within a safe and secure environment. One of the reasons that refuge is such a key concept is that we need a certain amount of security to do a lot of this profound work of questioning that the Buddhist path is inviting us to. So I'm with you. I think it's the, of course, terribly painful, but very, very fruitful, to get to the point of being willing to say, okay, I am going to question everything, and trust that that's how we get to the kind of firm ground that we want to be practicing on. Thank you so much. I'm so delighted that our community is going to hear your voice and be able to connect with some of the wisdom and the insights that you've drawn from this. And I look forward to having you here with us again.
I'm so honored to be here with you and enjoying the continued conversation. And, and just to point out, like, we were drawn together through this issue. That was what drew us together initially. So it's amazing when you lean in, what amazing friendships can blossom from the mud, just like the lotus, right? It's okay.
Right.
It's okay.